Hello? Hello? Testing? Just squeaked in. Oh. But I did forget 2 more places to post. They'll be fast, though. Alright. Oh. Model's freaking out of it. Oh, hi, Raker. Oh, and the timing. Look at that. We hit the end of the art gallery. That's perfect. Oh. Flash it again. Hey, there we go. Oh. I didn't change this last time. It's not Naira yet. Buddy, you don't fit on my arm like that. It doesn't work that way. Alright. Get that. Let the song play out because I love it. Oh. I hope you guys are ready for tonight. It's about to be exciting. Oh, I forgot. I actually need to start back here for the sake of the recording. All right. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome. I know I left you on a bit of a cliffhanger last time, so I'll try not to drag my heels too long here. But super quick recap. Last time we checked in with Leo and Melissa and got to see their fun tools and gadgets that they're going to get to bring into this. Specifically the magic shotguns that they made for them. And we learned a little bit about their elemental affinities, about Melissa's comfort with ice magic, and about Leo's natural draw towards entropy. Snuck in a little bit of Tarim there as well. Plus, he's just kind of a little bit of a generalist anyway. From there, we hopped over to Benji's Diner, where our favorite waitress, Noelle, or at the very least, Tolson's favorite waitress, Noelle, helped him crack the case, in a manner of speaking. Oh, hello, model. They laid out all of the evidence he'd collected and went to town digging through the numbers. And in so doing, they realized a very crucial point, which was that Bradburn and Paddock had been paying off the security departments of each of the 13 that got assassinated, which was how they were able to feed intel to Naira on where and how to make her hits. The money was recycled every time. Man, my camera is struggling tonight. The funding was recycled every time. So that's not going to make people happy. But yeah, so there's a trail of money pointing to Bradburn and Paddock. And now that Paddock is dead, it points pretty exclusively to Bradburn. From there, we actually geared up and moved out to the summit. At the summit, the traveling troupe with Renetta Dolahan, the Minister of Labor, was met with a rather strong security force, but she brought her own army to make sure that she and her people survived this harrowing night. There was a standoff, but eventually they were let through, and she joined the remaining members of the government, the 13, in their closed quarters. From there, we skipped over to Moira and Naomi and Sergei and Marston, who are all attending the concert that's being held on the other end of the venue, because it's a protest event. It was conveniently scheduled on the same night, a night where somebody plans to do something awful with a bunch of monsters, but thankfully the heroes are there to jump in when things start going south, which we'll probably get into tonight. She made her way up to the roof, tracing back some of the gas that they were detecting, and she discovered Tazael up there, hanging out with some generators that were gassing the place, which is not good. And while she got him monologuing, she set to work actually trying to disable these pumps. After that, we went over to Naira. Naira went in with... oh, let's not have that. Just a moment. Have to do the thingies. Ban. The joys of being a streamer. So Naira and Melissa went in to make an exchange to get Naira's husband back, Elaine. Melissa is impersonating Moira. That way she can be a juicy person of interest who happens to also be good in a fight. They got taken in by about a dozen guards, led into a room with a ton of cages, all of which were empty, but one contained Naira's husband, Elaine. They brought him out, handed him over, said, "How do you do?" Started to leave, and then opened fire. Naira deflected what bullets she could, but poor Elaine took a lot of gunshot wounds, and as he did, they noticed that something was wrong. Specifically, that he was starting to heal of his own accord without access to any sort of curum or magic. So that's not good. His eyes were also starting to glaze over. He kept insisting, Starlight, leave me. I'm dead. I'm dead. You don't know what they've done to me. She didn't listen because it's Naira and she's stubborn and she's determined to save him no matter the cost. And he lunged for her. And it ended with him latching onto her throat. So that was fun and exciting. So, now we're up to part 7, which is the climax and conclusion to the book. So, hopefully you guys are ready. It's all built to this moment. Part 7, Electrum. Is my volume good, by the way? I want to check before I get too far ahead. Excellent. All right. Fair warning. This chapter's a little rough, but we're going to get through it together. Chapter 53. Guinea Pig. 5 months ago. Good news, Elaine. Your wife continues to play her part perfectly. You get to live another month. Isn't that wonderful? Slumped on the scratchy concrete floor, huddled against a wall that felt like an aquam freezer, dressed in clothes that bore months of scratches from the times his captors grew bored, smelling from his lack of access to a shower with soap, the thought that his torment in this Fanina, where even the sun had forsaken him, would continue for another month? It was the opposite of wonderful. Bradburn had let himself into the cell. Why shouldn't he? Despite being a sneppard, he was taller than Elaine. He was bigger than Elaine, stronger than him. What was a professional musician supposed to do when locked away by a predator who enjoyed torturing his kills? Food was regular, but sparing, and Elaine could feel his strength seeping into the concrete as his body wasted away with every passing... Food was regular, but sparing, and Elaine could feel his strength seeping into the concrete as his body wasted away with every passing day. And yet, as the days crawled on, they did foster something in Elaine. Not courage. No. Courage would have saved up its strength, looked for opportunity to bait a guard into the cell alone, grab his weapon, and break out. Courage wouldn't have curled up in the corner, resigning itself that the only hope of salvation from this Fanina was if his wife, the chemistry teacher, appeared through that metal door at the end of the darkened hallway in a burst of light. It was not courage that led him to speak now. It wasn't even defiance. It was an understanding that the worst Bradburn could do to him was to finally kill him and be done with it. Nothing Elaine said mattered. Nothing Naira did mattered. No matter what happened, Elaine was going to die. What have you done with Tazael? He asked through cracked lips. Bradburn chuckled, gripping Elaine's chin in a meaty paw that smelled of the man's opulent dinner. His breath was awash with bourbon and necrol, though Elaine didn't even have the strength to wrinkle his nose as much as that combination deserved. Your son made his own deal for your life. Like his mother, he is playing his part well, proving himself to be nearly as useful as he claimed. There's a good chance you survive all this, Elaine. With that, he patted Elaine's cheek like an affectionate grandparent. Naira would have bitten the hand. Tazael would have leaned forward and bitten the throat. Elaine? Elaine sat in the corner, staring into the eyes of a predator, praying to Seed Mother that maybe he wouldn't use his claws today. No claws came out. Instead, Bradburn gave him a smile, like they were good friends that had just enjoyed a lovely evening together. See you in the morning, Elaine. An irrational side of Elaine berated him for not getting to his feet. It screamed that if he didn't bolt out past Bradburn now, he'd never leave this dungeon. It pleaded with him to try, to fight. Dying in a botched escape attempt would at least be released from this living Fanina. No. Naira would come. Tazael would succeed. He had to trust his family to do what he could not. They were working hard to save him. At least, if Bradburn could be believed. What reason did he have to lie to a dead man? It would be selfishness for Elaine to take matters into his own hands. What would it do to his family if they spent so much of themselves and he got himself killed anyway? All their effort and love for nothing. Not for the first time, he contemplated the merits of his death. Perhaps they could flee. If he was dead, they would have nothing to compel their actions, no hostage to constrain them. They could escape, with nothing to hold them here, to keep them pawns in Bradburn's schemes. That was folly. Even if Elaine died, Bradburn would simply pretend he hadn't. He would continue to bait them both along. There was no escaping any of this. This was a predator. There was no reasoning with him, no bargaining with him. The mouse was a fool who forgot the lethality of the cat's claws and teeth just because it spoke with a honeyed tongue. So Elaine sat huddled, alone in the cold corner, and wept. 2 months ago. Elaine was no longer alone in these dark cells. A number of Nolfs now filled the cells beside him, only these hadn't come from within Cyphus. They were larger in every respect than Elaine. Not always by much, but enough to be noticeable. They dressed like wild men in exotically colored furs that were marred by their own blood. Most amazingly, their eyes held a dim, yet constant prismatic glow. Bradburn had captured adult natives. Elaine had tried to communicate with them, but their language was different than Null. There were similarities, and they found a few words that seemed to be a commonality. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to allow for full conversation. That didn't mean the cells were quiet. The natives often communicated in low whispers, their sentences including added clicks and whines. There was something in their scent, too, something that conveyed emotion even more clearly than their tone. It had started with 2 natives. 2 had grown to 6, then to 12, then to 15. An escape attempt was made. Where the natives found the materials, Elaine wasn't sure, but they used ice and vines to break through the bars containing them. One of them had even freed Elaine. Then the natives had all been mowed down in a hail of gunfire. Elaine still bore fresh scars in his back from the clawing he'd received for leaving his cell. Some of the natives survived, but the attempt cost them whatever prism they'd had left in their system. More natives were brought in after that. Even though he had company now, Elaine was still alone. A new face introduced itself to the depths of Fanina. A familiar face, in the form of a Nolf in a lab coat, one of Salatra's old racing friends, a man named Dravota. Elaine tried to press him, to learn what he was doing and why. All he got in response was, "I'm doing my part, same as Salatra." Every few days, Dravota would come down and select one of the natives. They would leave, and Elaine wouldn't see that native again. Then a few days later, the next native would be taken. Today, it wasn't Dravota that burst through the door at the end of the darkened hallway. It was Bradburn. The look of calm control, of sadistic pleasure, was gone from the predator's eyes. What remained was simply murderous intent. It zeroed in on Elaine. The cat didn't intend to eat the mouse today. It intended to snap its spine and rip it limb from limb. Armed guards flanked Bradburn, but he didn't use them. He opened Elaine's cell himself, crossing the room in 3 paces and yanking Elaine to his feet. "What's going on?" Elaine asked numbly. The question was not spurred by curiosity or even survival. It was confusion and terror and a growing sense of reaching the end of the line. Bradburn's voice was a growl, stuffed so far down inside him it was a wonder any sound escaped. "Your wife failed to keep her end of the deal." So that was it then. It was Elaine's time to die. Bradburn hauled him out of Fanina and into a world of light. Elaine didn't have time to memorize the rooms they passed, didn't have time to learn the faces, or to register the different outfits across guards. Didn't have time to learn the faces, or to register the different outfits across guards. Bradburn dragged him into a room smelling of strong disinfectant that only barely masked the blood and vomit. "Tie him down," Bradburn said in that same icy growl. This was not time for fun. This was not time for pleasure. This was cold, calculating murder. The guards at his side forced Elaine into the chair, fixing restraints at his wrists and ankles. "His left forearm, too. I don't want anything to move." "What?" More padded belts were pulled from hooks on the wall, layering over his arm so tightly he could already feel the constriction on his circulation. "Wrist stays exposed." Again, it was neither courage nor survival that drew words out of Elaine. Shock and terror worked in tandem to make his lips move when his body and brain could not. "What are you going to do to me?" Bradburn ignored him, instead turning to one of the guards. "Go grab Devota. Tell him that it's time to test." Then his finger shot towards another guard. "Stay here with him until I get back." The guard nodded, taking a position by the door as everyone else left. Elaine glanced around the room. He didn't want to notice the blood-stained surgical tools or the pile of crimson rags in the corner. There was a floor drain in the center of the room, and russet fur stained red laid in dried clumps that nearly clogged it. "Please?" he breathed out, eyes meeting the guard's in a desperate plea. The guard pointedly looked away. Agonizing seconds passed before Bradburn reappeared in the door, an electrum power saw at his side, like the kind Elaine had planned to use for repairing the steps to his house. "Hold him still," came the order as Bradburn activated the saw. Bradburn was a ruthless and efficient predator. When he intended to mutilate his prey, he did so with exactness, and he didn't extend the suffering. Elaine's lungs couldn't draw in air fast enough to counter the constant scream for release. There was nothing for him to bite onto as the saw teeth ate into his bone. No longer was he cold, because everything was white-hot pain. His eyes couldn't focus, his vision blurring beyond cross-eyed as his head swam. It was a lifetime before the saw punched through the arm of the chair. Elaine's brain couldn't think, couldn't process what had just happened. His eyes were filled with tears and a cloudiness like he'd just woken up. He could see that his hand was no longer connected to his body, but that didn't mean his brain understood it. It couldn't be real. The pain was real. The blood filling the room with its pungent odor and vibrant splashings was real. The clumps of silver fur gumming up the teeth of the saw was real. The look of calm settling over Bradburn was real. Devota entered the room then, though his voice was muffled like he was speaking underwater. "Oh, Seed Mother Bradburn, what in Fanina have you done?" "Prepped him for testing," Bradburn said, setting the saw on the table beside the surgical tools. "Don't let him die." With that, the enormous sneppard, speckled head to toe in Elaine's blood, left the room. Elaine could barely keep his head upright. The screaming had stopped, though not because the pain had gone anywhere. His throat hurt now with a dryness that his legs envied. He couldn't look at anything, couldn't think. His head lolled to the side, and his breakfast came out to splash and play with the pool of blood on the floor. "Seed Mother's sake," Devota muttered, gesturing at one of the guards. "Tilt him forward so he doesn't drown in his own vomit." Elaine's sense of touch was so desensitized, he didn't register the guard's hands on him. His nerves were still overloaded elsewhere. Through the bog in his ears, Elaine heard the sound of a crack. It wasn't the crunch of bone again, though his body still found the strength to flinch. He would never forget what snapping bone sounded like. This was a crystal, one with a deep, violet hue. Gloved fingers pinched Elaine's jaw as something that tasted like death was placed on his tongue. The hand clamped his muzzle shut, and that necrotic taste filled his lungs. Elaine convulsed in his chair, more vomit shooting through his lips and out his nose. The fingers didn't relent. The fingers didn't relent or even flinch at the liquid torrent. "I'm sorry, Elaine," Dravota said in a voice devoid of sympathy. "I'd planned the regenerative test for one of the natives. I hope our theory is right, for your sake." Every part of him trembling, Elaine stared at Dravota with eyes that refused to work like they should. His body was cold, his mind growing hazy. Any willpower he'd had to hold out to the end was gone. His assumption that the worst Bradburn could do was kill him had been proven so very, very wrong. Now, death filled his lungs and his mind. His will had died, and his mind wasn't far behind. So which would give out first? His soul or his body? Either way, it couldn't happen soon enough. Excuse me. Chapter 54. Wife. Naira cracked the Curum crystal with her thumb. Taking a breath was almost impossible with Elaine's unnatural jaw strength, but she managed to take in just a bit more prism. She couldn't see Elaine's injuries this close to him, but she directed the Curum energy his way anyway. The Curum helped itself to the prism in her system. So did Elaine. She could feel it being sucked away, trying to drag her down into a state of helplessness. She wouldn't let it. Silatra wasn't helpless. Naira wasn't helpless. She clamped down on the tube between her teeth, filling her mouth with prism for any moment she could find a breath. Reaching forward, she planted the Curum crystal against his chest. Closing her eyes, she focused on the areas she remembered seeing him get shot. Warmth flooded out from under her hand and into him, and his jaws eased up just a hair. It was enough to sneak a bit of a breath, and the prism she took in went both to the Curum and to Elaine. That was fine. This was one case where she was willing, even eager, to share. Melissa came up beside them, her fingers reaching in to try to pry Elaine's jaws apart. No, too soon. He needed the prism. Naira couldn't form words. What came out was a strangled gulp as she reached up and tapped her mask. Thankfully, understanding came to Melissa's face. Pulling off her own mask, the detective opened the valve on her prism tank and pressed the mask over Elaine's nose. Naira was on the verge of blacking out. Prism had extended her consciousness, but even that was almost run dry. Blood ran down her shoulders, her chest, her back. Elaine was all she could smell. It was a scent that so overwhelmed her emotions it nearly paralyzed her. They stayed there like that for what felt like an eternity, though it was really only another 10 seconds. Elaine released her, falling back into a seated position. Naira gasped, coughing violently as her lungs fought against her attempts to breathe again. Taking in more prism, the next Curum crystal was pressed to her neck, and she felt the holes starting to seal. Melissa kept the mask clamped over Elaine's face, as it didn't hold well on its own. It'd been designed for shorter Sneppard snouts, but it had been enough. There was horror in Elaine's prismatic eyes. He was shaking, tears welling and spilling down his cheeks. His voice came out in a whisper already muffled by the mask. "I'm so sorry, Starlight." She shut him up with a hug. "You've nothing to be sorry for, dear." Slowly, with the caution of someone adding powdered aluminum to water, Naira pulled the mask off his face. She handed it back to Melissa with a nod of thanks. "Guard the door." Donning the mask herself, Melissa returned the nod and stepped away. Elaine continued to stumble over apologies as Naira checked his injuries. She'd managed to deal with most of them, so she shushed him as she finished the wounds that were left. "I have to heal you with Curum, or your body will try to heal itself with your blood." "I know," he said softly. That sent a chill through Naira's body. She glanced up to find him rubbing his left hand at the wrist. His touch was light, like he was worried he might twist his own hand off. "How long have you been like this?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Months, I think. They cut off my hand." "I know." He looked at her in surprise. "They sent it to me," she said, a barely checked rage dripping from her words. Elaine's eyes widened, and he looked suddenly faint. He held up his hand. "Then how?" Naira shook her head. She certainly didn't know. "Seed Mother, I thought they sewed it back on after I blacked out. Is this even my hand?" He was hyperventilating now, so Naira ran a hand through his cheek fur and gripped the back of his neck. "Elaine, we'll figure that out later, okay? For now, I need you to stay calm." "Stay calm? I just attacked the love of my life." Naira let out an exasperated sigh. Despite the circumstances, she was settling into teacher mode. "I know, but I think I know how to keep you from losing control. We're going to have to fight our way out, so I'm going to have you carry my alchemy bag. It's got all my spare prism canisters and handheld crystals in it, including plenty of Terram and Curum. If you start to feel like you can't breathe, take a dose of prism. If you get injured, use Curum. If you feel like chewing on my neck again, try Terram. If you get thirsty, the aquam's going to be very cold because it's high grade, so just drink carefully. And if I call for anything, toss it to me." Elaine nodded with each instruction, clearing his eyes with the back of his hands. "Sorry, Starlight. This is all just a lot." Smiling, she reached forward and planted a kiss on his forehead. Seed Mother, she'd missed that. "We've both survived this far, dear. Now it's time to get you home. You ready?" Resolution shoved past the guilt in his face, and he nodded again. "I'm with you to the end." "Company!" Melissa shouted from the door as gunfire rang out once more. The first few troops to open the door took a wave of water to the face. It solidified on contact. If they had been unprotected, that much ice would have plugged nostrils and frozen muzzles shut. However, these troops had also taken the time to don gas masks. Nothing like what Melissa and Naira had with prism tanks, but they were obviously made for filtration of some kind. Excuse me. They looked exactly like the kind of mask you needed if you wanted to take a trip outside the bulb. Just what had they brought those along for? While Melissa's burst of ice wasn't lethally suffocating, it did freeze masks to faces and completely obscure vision. These troops were pulled back and replaced with a fresh line. This time, Naira was the one to fire. The hammer cracked in the old man's rifle, triggering a secondary system Ame had installed that crushed the Aurum crystal inside with gusto. She called out a single word. "Loud!" Melissa responded to the warning immediately, lowering the shotgun into a position where she could wedge her ears between a hand and her shoulder. The next batch of troops had no clue what was coming as a wave of pressure rolled out from Naira. Even giving it so much forward direction, it still nearly knocked her backwards. Troops in the line opened fire, but the surge of wind magic deflected the bullets anywhere but where they'd been aimed. Then the tsunami of Aurum impacted the line. Sneppards were sent careening back into their fellows. Any weapons not attached by straps were tossed aside. Blood ran through many a set of fingers as to a man the Sneppards clutched at their ears. They should thank Seed Mother they'd put on the filtration masks, or they'd have lost their eyes too. Detective Melissa was back to a firing position, already sending out another wave of frost while Naira reloaded. Hobbling forward in a crouch, Elaine took shelter behind Naira. "You've been making new toys with Ame, haven't you?" "Figured if we were mounting a rescue, then I had to either bring an army or the firepower of an army." Naira's next shot required no warning. Quite a clump of confused goons had gathered in the choke point of a door. Between trying to drag away the ones who'd lost their sight and the ones who'd lost their hearing, they hadn't left much space for people to return fire. For now. Blue electricity formed at the end of Naira's rifle, lancing forward like a javelin thrown by the gods. It hit its first target, then erupted in blue tendrils that sought new friends. These bounced from guard to guard, dropping nearly another 10 to the ground in convulsions. While they had a choke point like this, they had an advantage. The only problem was, for the moment, they were cornered. These men weren't used to fighting Alchemancers, but they weren't stupid either. If this kept up, they'd pull back and save their fire for when the rescuers tried to leave. Naira wouldn't let it reach that point. She had, after all, promised to punch a hole. Besides, Dravota still needed to answer for his part in all this. "Dearest," she said over her shoulder as she loaded a firearm round, "once we leave this room, my friend over there's going to get you to safety. Her name's Detective Melissa, and she's on our side." "She's a snop?" he asked in wonder. "She's using alchemancy, like you?" "Well, who do you think taught her?" "You trust her?" As they watched, Melissa fired off another aquam round. Guards that had been dragging their fellows now found their hands and arms encased in thick ice that glued them to their compatriots. The number of immediate threats that could shoot at them had just decreased again. That was key to their survival. "I do." Elaine gave a solemn nod. That was sufficient for both of them. Planting a hand on Naira's shoulder, he fixed her with teary eyes. "I've just gotten you back. Promise you'll come home, Starlight." She nodded. "Knowing you, you'll have a surprise dinner waiting for me. I'm not going to miss that." He leaned in, pressing their muzzles together. Then he dashed across the room to take up Melissa's heels. Transferring the rifle to one hand, Naira sprinted for the door. The guards congregating there looked on in alarm. At least, the ones that weren't incapacitated already. Over a dozen rifles and handguns rang out as she ran. Naira flared the electrum in her suit, sucking bullets out of the air, leaving them hovering harmlessly a few inches from her plated forearm and gathering near her elbow. As the guards stopped to reload, she flared the electrum again. The bullet suspended by her elbow traveled forward, propelled by the pull of sequential electromagnets embedded along the arms of her suit. Naira had become the gun. These bullets didn't travel with the same momentum as they'd carried before, but it was more than enough to pierce flesh and add to the growing pile of bodies in the doorway. An aurum blast from one of her gloves carried her over the pile and out into the hallway. She caught herself with more aurum, sliding to a stop as she raised the rifle and fired. The crack of the giant crystal split the air. She had time to register that there were dozens and dozens of guards out here, far more than had escorted them, and then all she saw was flame. It poured out of the rifle in enormous swaths, as large in diameter as she was tall. Even concentrated at the end of the rifle and directed away from her, the heat from such a large firearm crystal was intense. She'd have lost a hand if she'd cracked that in her palm. The smell of singed fur and flesh assaulted her nose as she spun in a wide arc. Numerous voices cried out in terror and pain as she bathed both sides of the hall in fire. Then, the reaction died, and the light in the area dimmed. Smoke hung thick in the air, a dark cloud with nowhere to go. Melissa and Elaine scrambled over the mess in the doorway, feet slipping on melting ice and groaning bodies. "See you on the other side?" Melissa asked, finding a spot of actual floor to stand on and bringing the shotgun back to rest on her shoulder. Naira nodded. "Dravota, then Bradburn, then home." Melissa offered a small smile and a nod of her own. "Good luck, Alchemancer." "You too, Detective." "I'm serious, Starlight. Come home." Elaine clung to her bag like it would vanish the moment he stopped thinking about it. His eyes said he was equally worried the same would happen to her. "I'm sometimes late, but I always come home. Even if I miss the bus, I'll walk. Now go." Needing no further urging, Melissa and Elaine took off into the smoke. It was hard to watch him go, but Naira had chosen to trust others to help her. She couldn't give up on that now. Taking a breath of almost pure prism, Naira reloaded the rifle. Spinning on her heels, she turned away from the man she loved enough to kill for and started weaving through the moaning bodies. There were 2 more people for Salatra to hunt. A traitor and a murderer. Chapter 55. Public Servant. Can you not see the madness of what he suggests? He tries to soften the blow by referring to it as a mass deportation. But in the reality of the dangers that exist outside the bulb, eviction of that nature and scope is a death sentence. He suggests not mere deportation. He's asking for our compliance with genocide. Renetta's words echoed through the meeting chamber. In that moment, no one would dare consider her the smallest person in the room. Leo glanced through the 13. Many of them seemed uncomfortable with the turn this had taken. Bradburn had presented his plan, much as he had to Leo, though he'd softened it for these lifelong politicians. As palatable as it had been when Bradburn had served it to them, Renetta Dolahan had exposed the worms and slime it contained. How could they still go along with it now? A hush settled over the crowd as the most important individuals in the bulb considered a proposal that would be a second Fanina to the Nolfin people. Minister Edelston, the one closest to Renetta, was the first to speak. I don't believe anyone is in support of the willful destruction of an entire species. His words were so bogged down in caution, it was a wonder they'd ever escaped his lips. I understand that I have not done a sufficient job of demonstrating the dangers of inaction to this forum, Bradburn said. Perhaps it would serve us well to have an observable demonstration of why I believe this crisis calls for such a strong response. Crisis? Yes, there was a problem in how the bulb treated Nolfs, but the crisis wasn't what Bradburn claimed it was. With a snap of his fingers, Bradburn called over one of his guards. Bring the men. Carefully. Oh no. Leo watched in horror as a group of Bradburn infantry dragged in a lanky Nolf. The man looked bedraggled, bruised, worn down. Excuse me. He had on a pair of loose pants, but those were his only clothes. His eyes shone bright with prismatic glow. What I need all present to understand, Bradburn said, is that once the glow sets in, the alterations to the mind are irreversible. No longer are they capable of rational thought. They are reduced to a brute beast with but a single instinct: to hunt, to kill, to consume. The poor man let out a roar as one of Bradburn's men unloaded an electrum baton into him. His eyes began to glow with such ferocity, the iris definition disappeared. The Nolf lashed about, his claws extending to sharpened points that tore through the shirts and vests of those around him. His fangs pushed out from his mouth, and his saliva frothed around his lips like a rabid deerhound. He leapt for Bradburn, and panic set in around the room. Many private security personnel stepped forward, drawing weapons and putting themselves in front of their ministerial charges. Bradburn smiled. Drawing his Steris 55, a handgun so large it looked designed for his oversized paw, he fired a single round into the Nolf's chest. Large as the round was, it didn't down the man, instead merely forcing him to stumble backwards. Blood leaked down through the white fur of his chest as the eyes grew even more shrouded. "Stop this madness!" Renetta shouted. With a primal scream, the man charged at Bradburn again. Bradburn's next 2 bullets took him in the head. The Nolfin man crashed to the ground, twitching and convulsing. Bradburn's men surrounded the dying man, and more gunfire rang out as they finished him off. Returning his gun to its holster under his arm, Bradburn straightened his suit jacket and turned back to his stunned audience. The problem with fractal is that it ruins the body's ability to feel pain or form rational thought. It makes one go native. That was a lie in every possible sense. Prism brought awareness and clarity. That man had rushed Bradburn because he'd understood what Bradburn was doing. He'd known he was already dead, and he wanted to remove the one responsible for it. The longer they stay in that state, Bradburn said, the more likely even the tiniest thing will upset them and incite them to violence and murder. You just killed him, Renetta called out. I'm afraid that's the only recourse available once they're that far gone. Once the glow sets in, it's only a matter of time before something sets them off. There are over 200,000 Nulfs in Cyphus. Research from my time serving with the Cyphus police suggests that well over half of them are consistent fractal users. Do you think it's safe for the people of our great city to have irrational monsters wandering the streets? I do not blame them for their addiction. Indeed, it is a great tragedy, but it's not one that I'm willing to let bloom into even greater tragedy. Fractal-related deaths are on a steep incline. Will this forum stand by and ignore the danger? The other two Nulfs his men had dragged into this meeting were staring around in confusion and horror. Like their companion, they were dressed sparsely in clothing that didn't look to be truly theirs. They struggled weakly against their captors, crying out in a language Leo couldn't understand. He leaned over to Rolf, who looked equally petrified. Do you know what they're saying? Rolf shook his head, licking his lips like they'd gone dry. It's not Null. They're natives, Renetta said under his breath. They're natives, Renetta said under her breath. He didn't turn them native. He brought in natives to support his claims. Renetta, this has to stop, Leo hissed. He's going to kill those two as well. She nodded. Her chair scraped on the floor as she stood. That is quite enough demonstration. Honourable members of the 13, before we rule on the motion that Minister Bradburn has presented, I have information that I believe may impact our decision. She took a deep breath and continued. As you well know, our numbers have been dwindling. In the past 6 months, we have lost the Ministers of Commerce, Mining, Agriculture, Infrastructure, Revenue, Water, and most recently, Justice. This was no accident. As I'm sure you've heard, there have been reports of attempts on my own life. Publicity stunts, obviously, Bradburn called out from across the table. Otherwise, you would not have barged your way into this forum complaining because you felt left out. Ignoring him, Renetta continued, her voice carrying out over the gathered crowd. There have been 2 attempts on my life in the past month. Scooping a large manila folder from the table, she held it up for all to see. I hold in my hands definitive proof of transactions linking Ministers Paddock and Bradburn to the willful and intentional assassinations of these ministers. Proof of a conspiracy that has resulted in the halving of our number and the rise to power of one Walter Bradburn. Setting the folder down, she picked up multiple like it. I, of course, brought copies of our findings so that all present may examine the evidence for themselves. What relevance does this have to my motion? Bradburn asked. His tone was calm and measured, but Leo had worked with him long enough to recognize the fire burning in his eyes. Bradburn's legs were being cut out from under him, and he knew it. I'm suggesting that your position on this council is illegitimate, that you have no true power or position here because you have bribed and murdered your way into it, and those who do not have proper ministerial authority do not have the privilege of presenting motions such as yours to the 13. That sparked a frenzy of whispers. Multiple ministers sent their aides forward to retrieve the evidence Renetta had set aside for them. She handed them out eagerly as they came forward, being sure to flash a confident smile at Bradburn at every opportunity. Bradburn whispered to his own aides, one of which moved to come retrieve a packet of evidence. The others disseminated into his own personal crowd. Whispers were spreading like wildfire through the Bradburn camp, and his security forces started rearranging themselves. Beside him, Rolf tapped Leo's shoulder. "Hey man, you smell that?" Leo frowned, taking a careful sniff of the air. "Smell what?" Then he caught it. Faint, but unmistakable to one who'd known it for as long as he had. Necrum. No one in the room was smoking. So where? Bradburn's men were clumping against his side. His side had a door, and they were making an easy path to it. Men towards the back of the pack were unzipping duffel bags and handing out equipment. Gas masks. Oh, dross. The main doors to the room burst open. A Sneppard in Bradburn attire leaned against the doorframe, his vest smattered with what looked like fresh blood. "Minister Bradburn! It's the concert! They've gone native!" With impossibly convenient timing, a large form burst forward to snag the man, who screamed as he was dragged back into the hall. More large forms rushed past, darting into the room and running immediately for members of the 13. Fractal glow shone in their eyes, though there was still far too much clarity. These looked no different than any of the Alchemancers during a sparring session. Unfortunately, the ministerial security forces present wouldn't know the difference. As if to prove his point, the shooting began. The room collapsed into utter chaos. Rolf activated his suit, pulling Renetta behind him. Tigra turned and charged the nearest native. Leo's gaze stuck on Bradburn. The unflinching mountain gave orders to his men, who threw their 2 prisoners towards the developing fray. They unloaded a spray of bullets into the Nulf's backs, causing them to writhe and scream as the definition left their eyes. Moments later, the victims turned, swiping at whatever living creature was closest. The scent of necrum grew even heavier in the room. The aides and security forces guarding the other ministers hadn't yet noticed that their own eyes were beginning to glow. Bradburn's men had. With horror, Leo realized it was the excuse Bradburn had been looking for. The man was in charge of his own narrative at every step of the way, and now he ordered his men to open fire. Not on the natives, but on anyone who wasn't their own. Thankfully, Renetta's men weren't oblivious to this, and they started firing on Bradburn's men. Leo rushed forward, flipping the table Renetta had used on its side, tucking both Rolf and Renetta against it. Renetta shook her head. "This is madness!" "This is how a brute takes control," Leo replied. "This is how a brute takes control," Leo replied grimly as he pulled his mask on. "By pure force and a willful obliviousness to collateral damage," said the man about to use necrom magic. Propping the shotgun on the edge of the table, Leo aimed at the closest batch of Bradburn forces and fired. A ball of purple mist formed at the end of the gun before launching out to wash over a tight group of a half-dozen men. Leo latched onto the necrom with his prism, willing it to focus only on metal. His only goal? Save lives through disarmament. Tigra came running back, dragging one of the monsters by the scruff. He huddled low by the table, though parts of him undoubtedly still stuck out. "We have problem," he announced. "Bradburn has made this change to his own guards. This not concert goer. This altered guard." Leo could see at a glance that he was right. This wasn't some kit in street clothes. It was a Sneppard with a knife strapped to his thigh. His eyes held a distant fractal glow, though he didn't move. It seemed Tigra had introduced his head to the floor multiple times. Peeking back over the table, Leo fired off another necrom burst and disarmed another 4 guards. The body count in the room was climbing far too rapidly, but Leo had to remind himself that every little bit that he did would help in the end. Something else caught Leo's attention. The group in the far corner. Those were the ones Leo had noticed fractal glow in after he caught the scent of necrom. Their glow had grown stronger and had spread to the entire group. Anyone with fractal glow became an instant target of gunfire. Fanina, this was a nightmare. Pointing across the room, he called out to Tigra. They're gassing that group! Anything you can do, big guy? Tigra grinned, tossing the unconscious Sneppard in his hands aside like a suddenly uninteresting toy. Tigra save little ministers. Then, he flung himself across the room with an Aurum burst that drowned out the gunfire. Leo waved over the closest of Renetta's men. It was a young Sneppard, maybe Leo's age, with a messy tumble of hair that matched the shock on his face. He'd probably never experienced a firefight of this size before. Leo pulled his ear close, yelling over the near-constant gunfire. Get to your radio, guy! Let Marston know what's happening. Warn him that Bradburn's trying to pin this on the concert. Tell him that Bradburn's brought his monsters. And if anybody smells Necrum, get the Fanina out of there. Despite his pale expression, the man nodded, hopping to Leo's orders right away. The next peek over the table afforded Leo a glimpse of Bradburn as he and a good chunk of his men slipped out the back door. Dross. Bradburn was getting away. Leo fired round after round of Necrum, leaving over a dozen of Bradburn's forces disarmed and dazed by the time he settled back behind the table to reload. The fight was over by the time he finished reloading. What portion of Bradburn's guards was still standing finally retreated through the back doors. The body count was in the hundreds. Men and women on all sides lay dead or dying. Bradburn had orchestrated a massacre. Worse, knowing him, he wasn't finished. Off to the side, any monsters left in the room, Tigra had in hand. Literally. Either this strain wasn't as dangerous as what had been kept beneath the prison, or giving a man of Tigra's size near unlimited Aurum use was an unfair advantage. Either way, he had that side of the room under control, and was working to calm the stressed and heal the injured. Leo leaned into Rolf. We need to get Madame Dolahan somewhere safe. Work with her people. Make it happen. Rolf nodded. What about you? I'll take a squad and follow Bradburn. I have to stop him. He has to answer for what he's done. Rolf nodded again, a sudden fire in his eyes. That man killed the closest thing I have to family. Take him down for me. Bradburn will face justice, Leo assured him. The Kit gave another nod, reaching out to grip Leo's forearm. Then he gave a more subdued, pained version of his usual doofy grin. Thanks, Chief. He released Leo, then turned his full attention to Renetta. Standing up, Leo motioned to the least damaged-looking group of Renetta's forces. With me, he ordered, as he jogged for the back door. Little bit of water. Chapter 56. Equal and Opposite Reactions. Moira barely found the Firearm song in time to deflect it to the side. It wasn't an issue of hearing the nuances within the song. No, the amplifiers in her ears made that part child's play. Much like the difference between listening to your cassette with cheap 10 Christum earbuds, or listening with a pair of 200 Christum surround sound headphones, these amps brought every little deviation, every unique voice of the magic front and center. And all of those voices happily sang about giving Moira a hug she didn't want. It wasn't the Firearm's fault. It didn't understand that hugging Moira would harm her. Raw energy didn't understand anything at all. It just did what it was told. And right now, Tazale was telling it to torch her. A puff of Aurum from her own glove pushed her behind a large air conditioner, barely providing her cover as a fresh blast of flame shot her way. She gasped for breath, her lungs pleading for reprieve. No, it wasn't the hearing that was the problem. It was the singing. Yes, it let her catch and redirect the magic Tazale was flinging her way, but the speed of thought far outpaced the speed of sound. Sound made it easy to cheat the system, to undermine the original caster's intent with the magic. But her cheating was costing her. Sure, she could do a little visual casting, but to counter magic with visuals required quite a bit of guesswork. You had to closely approximate the original caster's intent and offer it a similar enough alternative that it listened. Easy. Except that it absolutely was not. While she remained on the defensive, singing was her best option, but that had limitations too. The most painfully apparent one? Singing constantly for minutes on end was leaving her lightheaded and winded. She needed a chance to catch her breath, to try to stop her vision from swimming with quite so many lights. "I won't touch your stupid pumps if you just tell me what they're doing," she called, spending her precious air on a gamble. In the past, Tazael had always been happy to dialogue about himself. He was delightfully self-absorbed and stupid like that. The only time she'd ever seen him stop talking was in fights with Naomi, where they settled into letting their teeth and fists do the talking. Moira hadn't pushed him to that point yet. To be honest, she'd barely gotten any retaliatory strikes off, but that was her own fault for loading her suit with Tarim and Orim. There were great elements for defense. For offense, though, she was still working on that. She heard a dry laugh over the pouring rain and allowed herself a moment of relief. Her gamble had paid off. Deep breaths flooded her straining lungs as Tazael took the bait. "I told you. I'm going to open people's eyes. They're going to be forced to see. I'm catalyzing change. Just not the way they thought." "So you're willing to sacrifice innocence to do it?" The megaphone was a huge blessing here, letting her catch up on breath while still projecting her voice to keep him talking. "They're not innocent. Pretty sure they're just trying to enjoy an awesome concert. I've no intention of sacrificing them." Well, that sure didn't match up with his actions. "Could have fooled me, Dipdross. You're the one who's pumping tainted fractal down there." He laughed, backboomed by a crack of thunder. "Wait, why would I use Bradburn's poison on Nolfs? How dumb do you think I am, squeakers?" Dumb enough to let me get my breath back, she thought. Taking the opportunity to check her batteries, she grimaced. She'd already used most of the Orim one and would have to replace it soon. "So there's nothing special about this one?" "It's my gift to them. Fractal and Tarim, like Ren would have wanted." "Don't you mean Prism?" she asked. "If you leave out the garbage fillers, there's no practical difference." While she didn't exactly trust Tazael, he didn't seem like he was lying. And he had seemed more concerned with simply keeping her away from the pump than actually hurting her. Probably. "So what about the rest of the pumps?" Another crack of thunder rang out, and Tazael's response was almost drowned out by the rain pounding the roof around them. "I'm giving Bradburn a taste of his own medicine." Okay, that sounded very bad. She needed to find those other pumps. "You don't have to do this, Tazael," she called out, peeking from her cover. "You don't have to do this, Tazael," she called, peeking out from her cover to watch him. He stared back at her, confident as Anima herself, eyes alight with prism and crystals waiting in both hands. "The police are going to arrest him tonight," she continued, cautiously getting to her feet. She needed to be ready to sprint, just as soon as she spotted the other pumps. "He's wanted for murder. After tonight, he's not going to hurt anyone ever again." "That," he said, pointing a finger at her, "that's the one thing we agree on." There. A clump of oddly shaped metal things covered sloppily with tarps. They were laid out in a line on the other side of the stadium. Nina. She'd just gotten her breath back. She didn't want to run that far. Like it or not, she didn't have a choice. Time to buy herself a head start from Dum Dum. "You also have a lovely mother, so that's two things to agree on, and..." She cut off, pointing dramatically in the opposite direction she intended to run. "Wait, isn't that Bradburn over there?" Tazael blinked against the rain, but continued staring right at her. The seconds dragged on to awkward levels of silence she'd only ever achieved the one time she'd asked someone to a school dance. Finally, he shook his head with a laugh of disbelief. Really, Squeakers? In what world was that going to work? She shrugged. Worth a shot. Then, like her date-to-be had done to her last year, she took off in a sprint. Unfortunately, physical exercise was not Moira's strong suit. If Sergei didn't drive her around, then she used her Aurum board to get places. She didn't have that now, but what she did have was magic. And if Naira could propel herself along using Aurum, then so could Moira. Running along an exposed vent, Moira leapt into the air, throwing a hand behind her to release Aurum. A wall of wind magic scooped her like a spoon, and at her song it carried her forward with disorienting speed. The wind tugged at her hair, whipping it behind her like a second, smaller tail. If she didn't have the face shield of her mask, her eyes would have been watering. She gained ground for a good 30 seconds, at least, until the Aurum battery ran out. The good news? It had gotten her almost halfway to her destination. The bad news? Her momentum was retained when the magic faded. She tried to hit the ground running, but face-planted instead, skidding painfully across the slick gravel. No sooner had she gotten to her feet than she heard another blast of Aurum heading her way. She just used a lot of breath to get here. Couldn't she catch a break? Like his mother, Tazael was relentless. Forcing air into her lungs, Moira ducked as she directed the Aurum straight upwards. The wind magic rushed overhead with a roar that made her cringe in her mask. The burst carried the rain with it, and bought her a few moments where no more raindrops fell on her. Then it passed, and the deluge continued. Ejecting the Aurum battery from her suit, she reached down for a replacement. Fyram streaked her way as Tazael closed the distance. Focusing on singing while getting the fresh Aurum installed was a bit like trying to pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time. The battery didn't quite lock into place, instead clattering to the ground as she dodged away from the fire magic. Okay, this was getting annoying. She spent the whole time on the defensive, hoping her supplies would outlast his. They probably would, but it didn't seem like he was going to run out anytime soon either. She had stronger materials and a more efficient form of casting than he did. It was time to go on the offensive. Moira slowed to a brisk walk to make it easier to breathe. Weaving around exposed vents and pipes, she did her best to keep something between the two of them at all times. Releasing a steady flow of Terrum from her suit, she loaded her catalyst with an aquam crystal. Singing along with the Terrum, she started circling back. Bits of grass and vine began filtering through the gravel lining the roof, flecks of green battered by the rain. Tazael took the opportunity to refresh his prism. Moira pressed play and imagined punching Tazael in the face. A moment later, a giant fist formed out of pure ice surged over the vent, colliding with Tazael's jaw. He stumbled backwards, swearing. "You're really starting to piss me off, Squeakers." "That makes 3 things we agree on," she sang, continuing the Terrum song. The growth was almost ankle-high now. With a growl, Tazael started a fresh barrage of magic, and the exchange began again. Tazael threw fire, Moira threw ice. The air around them crackled with the rapid changes in temperature. When fire didn't work, Tazael switched to Aurum. Moira countered with bursts of electrum that forced him back. The exchange continued until they were both breathing heavily. They'd have both been sweating if not for the frigid rain. The poor vent between them was coated in equal measures of ice and char, and bent into an almost unrecognizable ball of sheet metal. Moira had to stop the Terrum song for just a moment to get enough breath back not to pass out. Tazael's hands came to rest on his knees for a moment. He forced words out around large lungfuls of air. "I'd like your spunk, if you weren't so bracking annoying, Kit. In another life, we might have been friends." Moira's vision was a flood of dots of light and streaks of rain running down her mask. "You say that like this life doesn't provide that option." Her fingers working by instinct, she loaded her catalyst with a fresh electrum cartridge. He shook his head. People like me don't get to have friends. It's the cost of changing the world. What a drama queen. His hand reached for more prism, and like a coiled viper, Moira struck. She burst into Taram's song, and the steady undergrowth beneath their feet surged upwards in a tangle of vines that wrapped around Tazael's body. His arms constricted to his sides, and vines laced over his shoulders before pulling him down to a kneeling position. The more she sang, the tighter the Taram pulled him into a ball. Her voice cracked as she ran out of breath. Staggering forward, she dropped to a knee herself to not pass out. They both stayed there for a long while, their ragged breathing getting lost to the sounds of the rain and thunder. How do I shut off the pumps, Tazael? He snorted. Already told you, squeakers. They're on chemical timers. You're not going to shut them off once they start. So there's still time? A bitter laugh emerged from the creaking tangle of vines. You think I'd be wasting time with you if there wasn't? Every fiber of my being wants to go track down Bradburn and kill him. Well then, stop being a pain and go do that. It's not quite time. Moira sighed. Nothing he said was useful. Standing up, she thumbed over her shoulder. I'm gonna go mess with your pumps, so just hang out here and think about your life choices or whatever. Though to be honest, I don't really care what you do with your time. It's a dangerous thing to turn your back on me. I don't care, she sang, blending it with Taram's song to work the vines around his muzzle and shut him up. Then she turned and walked for the pumps. She'd taken all of 3 steps when there was a roar of fire behind her. Idiot. What did he think fire was going to do against thick, sopping vines? Glancing over her shoulder, she found herself staring at an inferno. Was he trying to burn himself alive? Did he have even a sliver of self-preservation anywhere in his overly thick skull? An Aurum pop was the only warning before Tazael was launched from the blaze, skidding to a landing just a few feet away from her. Oh, come on, she whined. Tazael's hand whipped forward, sending a fresh burst of fire her way. He was close enough now that her singing wasn't quite fast enough to fully deflect it, and the fur on her neck, damp as it was, still singed with a painful heat. The flames parted, and Tazael was there. His hand shot forward and gripped Moira's mask. Then the electrum hit her. It coursed through her body, causing every muscle to constrict as she went rigid in his grasp. She couldn't sing to counter this one. Let's try that again. She couldn't sing to counter this one. Her lungs compressed, and it seemed a toss-up whether she'd black out from the pain or the lack of oxygen first. Something popped in her mask, and the amplifiers in her ears rang with an awful feedback before they too popped and went silent. Finally, the terrible convulsions stopped, and her muscles relaxed as the electrum burst ended. Her legs were jelly, her eyes unfocused, her mind unresponsive. Reaching behind her head, Tazael undid the clasp and ripped off her mask. There was a hiss as he disconnected it from her prism tank. He released her, and she slumped to her knees. Rain pelted her head, rinsing her already matted face. It thumped dully against her skull, a distant white noise she could feel but barely heard. No longer could she hear the music of magic. In fact, when Tazael spoke now, she had to really concentrate to make out his words. Try as she might, focus was eluding her right now. Her body was still reeling from shock, literally. Give it a rest, squeakers. You put up a good fight, and you made me waste a lot of stuff I made to deal with Bradburn. Her head swayed as her body struggled to calm, struggled to find breath. Her prism was slipping away. A part of her knew she needed more, needed the clarity it provided, but she was too numb to move. Every breath she took now let more dullness seep in, a warmth that countered the rain. Tazael crouched in front of her, her mask cradled against his legs. Do yourself a favor, Kit. Tomorrow's going to be a new world. Farina, you probably won't even notice. So go home. You're not the hero here. Moira's voice spilled through her lips like the water running freely through her suit. You're no hero either. It was nearly lost to the rain, and Tazale had to lean in to hear her. That's where you're wrong, Squeakers, he said. Like it or not, people are going to remember me after tonight. There's a difference between heroism and infamy. He sighed, pushing back up to his feet. You and I are never going to see eye to eye. Sorry, Kit. You lost this one. It's time to quit. Give me a sec to clear my nose. Like Moira, I need to be able to breathe. Chapter 57. Prodigy. Moira's head continued to spin. She'd lost. She'd had better tools, better methods, and she'd still lost to someone older and bigger. Brack! Frustration welled up inside her. What was that going to accomplish? Was she going to punch the gravel? Dig those sharp little stones into her fists until the pain flushed away her anger? Her scream was muffled against her own ears, sounding like it was some other failure up here on the roof with them. Her fingers trailed through slick gravel, and she flung a handful at Tazale's departing back. It bounced off harmlessly, and she couldn't even hear the rattle of individual stones as they fell back to join their brethren on the rooftop. Tazale said something, but she couldn't make out the words. Her hearing was shot. Her prism source was walking away in someone else's hands. How was she supposed to use magic now? Some Alchemancer she was. And yet, she still pushed herself to her feet. Everything hurt. Her muscles still hadn't forgotten their tension, and parts of her limbs felt like they were moments away from cramping. She hadn't lost this fight yet. She still had breath in her lungs, and that was enough. Tazale said something else. She didn't catch the words, but you could hear the derision in his tone. Giving in to the frustration, she charged at him. Her body collided with his back, forcing him to take an awkward step forward to keep his balance. Unfortunately, his stupid long legs kept him from falling over. Seriously? Hands gripped her shoulders, attempting to throw her off. No. He wasn't getting rid of her that easily. Her claws flexed to full extension, digging in deep to his abdomen. She even brought her feet against his calves, putting her whole weight on his hips as she kicked and tore. Tazale's swearing turned into a feral growl, and he brought a fist down into her head. More stars appeared in Moira's already speckled vision, and the dull thump of his hit rattled her brain. Still, she clung on. He hit her a second time, so she added her teeth to the mix, biting him in the side. His fingers worked their way under the straps of her suit, and he ripped her free. Then he flung her into another exposed vent. She collided with the thin sheet metal, denting it as she slid to the ground. No. With a shake of her head, she stumbled back to her feet and assumed a fighting stance. Fine, Tazale snarled, his own fingers curling into fists. I tried to spare you, but if you're Fanina bent on getting a pounding, then so be it. His first punch was clearly intended to be his only punch, a straight for Moira's face. Weeks of training kicked in, and Moira deflected the blow to the side before countering with a jab to his plexus. The look of surprise on his stupid face filled Moira with determination. No, she hadn't lost this fight yet. Tazale swung again, and Moira raked her claws along his arm. He kicked at her, and she deflected it with her shin. Every blow he threw her way was turned aside and returned with interest. Tazale had power, resilience, and experience. Moira had speed, precision, and practice. For every hit she took, Tazale took two. The angrier he grew, the calmer Moira felt. No, she didn't have Prism right now, but her breathing was steadying. His hand clamped onto her shoulder, and instinct took over. Moira spun, gripping his arm and sweeping his legs, throwing him down into the gravel with a splash. With no idea what was coming, Tazael hit the ground hard. It bought her only a few seconds before Tazael grabbed her and dragged her to the ground, turning it into a wrestling match. They were both soaking wet, which made it hard for either to find purchase as they each attempted to subdue the other. Moira's claws helped, but eventually Tazael won out. He held her, one arm around her waist and one arm around her throat. Her arms were pinned to her sides, her feet kicking uselessly in the air. She couldn't overpower him. She'd lost her opportunity to outmaneuver him. Every time she tried to wiggle for more room, he just constricted tighter. No matter how she twisted, she couldn't find an angle to get in a blow or use her claws. One option presented itself to her oxygen-deprived mind. A dangerous option. A stupid option. That didn't matter. Moira refused to lose. Straining against his pen, Moira's fingers brushed against plastic. She trailed along the row of buttons on the loaded cassette before finally settling on the well-worn one that said play. She pushed it. A few moments later, a fresh burst of electricity bounced between them both, far, far worse than what Tazael had used on her, as the high-grade electrum crystal inside discharged into both of them. Mercifully, it was enough of a shock that Moira blacked out. She came to sometime later with a pounding headache. Rain ran down her nose, and she swallowed reflexively. Then the coughing began. Horrible coughing that brought pain to muscles she hadn't known her abdomen even had. Her hearing was coming back slowly, but it was a far cry from what it should be. She rolled off Tazael, sharp spikes of pain running up her arms as she landed in the gravel. Her heart thumped in her chest with such explosiveness she could almost hear it again. Tazael groaned, rolling in the opposite direction she had. Every muscle screaming at her, Moira pushed herself onto her hands and knees. Her palms nearly slipped on the slick gravel, but she managed to keep from falling on her face. Neither of them had lung capacity for words. What good would words have done at this point anyway? Both of them were clearly too stubborn to surrender. Tazael clutched his stomach, fighting for breath as he sat up. Moira scrambled to her feet, trying and failing to keep her hands in a fighting stance. He looked at her and shook his head before finally finding the strength to speak. "Stunt like that smells of Mom. It's a miracle you didn't kill us both." "Stop this madness," Moira pleaded. Tazael continued to stare at her, his lips parting in a scoff as he clutched his side in pain. "You've got no prism, Kit. You can barely stand. The only way this ends is if one of us stays down. In a few seconds, I'm going to be back on my feet, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. You have nothing. No strength left, no magic you can control. I told you already. You lost." No. Moira refused to accept that. She had options. A true Alchemancer always had options. Rain continued to pelt them both, a steady drumbeat to the world around them. It was a fraction of a beat off the tempo Aquam normally held. She couldn't hear any Aquam song at the moment, but it played through her head anyway. She'd spent the past few months listening to magic, and she knew their songs by heart now. A thought formed in her mind, the most ridiculous, far-fetched plan she'd had all night. And yet, instinct took over as she started to sing. Quiet at first, and it faltered when the next peal of thunder rang out, but still she sang. "I already said, you got no prism, Squeakers. Give it a rest." "How many times do I have to tell you?" she sang, settling into Aquam's rhythm, her words riding its bubbly progression. "My name is Moira." Her name carried Aquam's cadence, and the very raindrops around her began to glow. Emboldened, she sang even louder, carrying the next verse with a single word, a desperate command. Constrain! The water pooling around Tazeel's hands and legs began to glow. Even without Prism in her system, the element listened, her harmonizing close enough to earn her a response. Indeed, as she watched, she could tweak her sound and observe the glow to know when she was getting even closer to matching the rain's song. Ice sprang up, hardening around Tazeel's legs. He pulled his hands away in shock, but the driving rain served to cover them in a glowing... He pulled his hands away in shock, but the driving rain served to cover them up in a growing layer of ice, too. That's not possible, he muttered, staring in numb disbelief. Then he glanced up at her, through rain that her song was changing into snow. What are you? Finishing the chorus, Moira let the song fade out. She regarded him, still shocked herself that her idea had worked. She knew she shouldn't gloat. Gloating wasn't exactly a heroic pastime. But man, oh man, this stupid Nulf was such a frustrating piece of work, and this victory had been so hard won, she couldn't stop herself from indulging. I'm the better Alchemancer. She expected him to scoff, to challenge, or otherwise ruin the moment. He didn't. Instead, he stared at her with uncomfortable amounts of wonder. She wanted his respect. Receiving his adoration felt gross. Now that you've lost, she said, how do I stop what you started? His reply was cut off by an enormous explosion that shook the stadium. Gravel rattled beneath Moira's feet as she stumbled to keep her balance. Despite her still partly muffled hearing, she heard the distinct shriek of metal scraping on metal. I told you, Moira. You don't. Change is already happening. All we can do now is work with what comes next. Moira's gaze darted in all directions, looking for the source of the explosion. Had he blown up the summit? But no, the stadium was intact. So what had... Smoke billowed from the base of Siphus's central spire. Do you know how they cracked Fanina? Jazeel asked quietly. A number of rings circling the central spire began to glow as it prepared for the next discharge of lightning. Every bulb has a spire. It's centralized so that each bulb had a place to generate power while they worked towards self-sufficiency. The first ring shone vibrant blue. The spire itself is designed to extend beyond the dome, so it can discharge beyond the glass. There's an opening that's supposed to form and let it out when it extends. The second ring shone vibrant blue. What happens when the spire is zapped into extension, but the hatch stays locked? The third ring shone vibrant blue. You're insane, Moira muttered, her growing horror transfixing her as a spectator. Tazeel let out a wry laugh. Probably. But I couldn't think of any better way to help Siphus see. To fulfill Rin's vision. Prism's not what they think. We're not what they think. The final ring shone blue. With an electric hum Moira could feel, even over a block away, the spire activated in a burst of electricity. It rocketed into the sky, slamming into the top of the dome and punching through to the outside world. Lightning sparked beyond the dome. Glass fell in enormous chunks that glittered in the rain. The very air around the new hole seemed to sparkle as well. Siphus had just been breached. All right. 840. Next chapter's 10 pages. We've covered a lot already. Do you guys want one more? Or you want to call it there? How are we feeling? Normally I try to go till 9. And I think we can fit 10 pages into 20 minutes. Probably. It is a lot. I can wait if you guys want time to process all that. And we can save this for next time. Although this next chapter is standalone. It's not a cliffhanger in the same way the last one was. Unless there's any objections, I'm kind of inclined to squeeze it in. We still have 170 pages to the end of the book, so you know, we gotta keep it going. So one more. Chapter 58. By the book. It would help if I had the right thing for this. Whoops. Nope, that's not the right thing. There we go. Let's try that again. Chapter 58. By the book. Melissa steadied herself against the wall as the building shook. What the fanina was that? She glanced over her shoulder at Elaine, who was cringing and keeping a nervous eye on the dust wafting from the ceiling. As quickly as it arrived, the shaking stopped. The electrum lights overhead flickered, then winked out. You okay? She asked. He nodded, motion barely visible in the darkness, just before another sound assaulted them. It sounded like the world's biggest car crash. Fanina, were they at the center of the end of the world? Nothing so dramatic, it seemed, as there were no more explosions or crashing sounds after that. They braced for anything further, but heard only the sound of their own breathing. That, and a constant hiss from the vents. Did the stadium's ventilation run on backup power? Retrieving her trusty firearm torch from her belt, Melissa fixed it under the barrel of the Alchemancer shotgun. It cast the hallway in a flickering orange light that only partly calmed her nerves. Elaine's eyes continued to glow, though he hadn't needed to take as much prism as Melissa had feared. At the rate he was using, Naira's supply would last him for a long time. That meant the key was to make sure he never had a reason to use what he had. Keep him from injury, keep him from becoming a monster, and keep all her limbs intact. Seemed easy enough. So of course that was the moment a door burst open at the far end of the hall, and an entire squad of Bradburn troops spilled out. Not Renetta's forces, or the backup Tolson had promised to bring from Precinct 3. Nope, these were Bradburn's people. And of course they saw Melissa and Elaine before she could cover her torch. No doubt they'd spotted the reflections from the absurd neon rainbow jacket she still wore. Seed Mother, her luck today was horrific. She barely pulled Elaine behind an abandoned food cart before the shooting began. Shards of glass, exploded condiments, and shredded paper hot dog trays rained down around them as they huddled against the cart. After several tense seconds of hearing bullets zip through the cart and ricochet off the floor, someone in the squad had the sense to call for a ceasefire. Once one lost sight of their target, it seemed like it should have been logical to stop shooting, but these people had to be told. Good to know that she was dealing with trigger-happy idiots. In the silence that followed, Melissa pulled off her mask, freeing her mouth as she shouted, I am Detective Melissa McKinley with Cyphus Police, Precinct 3. Firing automatic weapons at a police officer is an infraction of Charter 2, Article 1, Section 1, Paragraph 3. The whole section is about the decades-long sentence that the attempted murder of a police officer carries, though the use of automatic weaponry tends to add to that sentence. Do you really wish to throw your lives away by continuing to fire on a police officer? Lay down your weapons, and I promise your cases will be handled with leniency. Blast, where was Tolson? She needed backup now. I take it you're considering, she called. She heard distant shuffling and hushed voices. Small circles of firearm torchlight scanned the dark room around them. Cautiously, she started to peek over the cart. No sooner had she poked out an ear than one of those circles washed over her, and the shooting began again. Cursing, she ducked back down by Elaine. Having been given a chance to surrender, they've chosen to persist, she muttered to herself. That's more than most would have given them. She turned to Elaine with a wry smile. Well, that clears up any shadow of a doubt on my legal ability to engage with lethal force. So that's at least something. He looked at her with wide eyes, flinching with every new shot that flew past. We're trapped, he moaned. For the moment, Melissa admitted, pulling the mask back over her face and taking a breath. For the moment, Melissa admitted, pulling the mask back over her face and taking a fresh breath of prism. She'd come to appreciate the clarity of thought it afforded, far more potent than a strong cup of coffee. Right now, they were pinned down. If she were to attempt returning fire here, she might drop one, maybe even two of their attackers, but the other 20 or so would riddle her with bullets. She needed a better position to hold. Problem was, there was nothing nearby to give her adequate cover. With 20-odd torches scanning the hull, it seemed likely at least one would spot her if she moved. The next bullet passed so close, it ripped a hole just under the arm of her gaudy jacket. So they couldn't really stay here either. Time to improvise then. Aiming the shotgun at the ground, Melissa fired an aquam shot. A wall of ice over a foot thick sprang up beside the cart, coming up to about chest height and stretching out over a 10-foot span. Immediately, the beams from a dozen firearm torches converged on it, the orange light refracting through the thick, off-blue, opaque wall. Taking a deep breath to replenish what prism she just used, Melissa slipped behind her wall in a crouch. The goons responded to the movement by firing on the enormous slab of ice. Melissa flinched as ice chips rained to the ground, though not on her side. Cautiously, she looked at her wall and could see the aftermath as bullets impacted the other side. To her great relief, it held. The wall didn't even crack. It just gained new holes, like someone was chiseling into it with a pencil, though nothing got through to her side. I need to get closer, she said, beckoning to Elaine. You want to go towards the people shooting at us? No, of course I don't want to, but I'm going to have to if I want to return fire. Besides, that card is pretty much done for. I'll give us protection as we go. Elaine grimaced, but nodded, scrambling forward to join her. He cried out in pain, tripping and nearly landing on Naira's bag. Dross. Worried he'd been shot, Melissa reached out for his shoulder. Elaine, you okay? Pressing his back against the ice, Elaine bared his teeth. Gingerly, he brought a foot into his lap. Melissa shone her light on it and winced. A chunk of glass, over an inch long, was embedded in the space between pads. Unlike her, he didn't have the luxury of boots. Perhaps it was a small miracle Bradburn had let him keep any clothes. With trembling fingers, he gripped the glass. His breathing hitched as his body tensed. Are you sure you should? Melissa began, but was cut off as he yanked the glass free. Never mind. Elaine gasped, eyes squeezing shut and reopening to let out tears of pain. He tossed the bloody chunk of glass aside, and it skittered across the floor. Curum. He needed Curum. Before Melissa could do anything, Elaine was already digging into Naira's bag to get the necessary materials. His eyes lost just a bit of definition, but he retained his focus. Within seconds, he was treating himself. You good? Melissa asked, hesitantly. He nodded. Pain's fading. Makes me uncomfortable that I felt the healing began even before cracking the Curum, though. Don't worry. I can walk. It wasn't his ability to walk that worried Melissa. The last thing she needed was for him to lose control and jump her while she was fighting other people. He seemed to be on top of it, though, and he at least attempted a reassuring smile. So be it. If I make more walls, can you help me split their fire? I can certainly try, though I'm not going to be able to fire back. I'll worry about that. I just need a distraction. Then clipping her torch from the gun, she handed it to Elaine. He took it, glancing down at it like he'd just been handed a kit. Gripping it in resolute fingers, he nodded. Here goes nothing, Melissa muttered. Then she built another wall. This one wasn't as high as the first, so she got it to take up nearly half the width of the hallway. Elaine took off down its length in a crouch, his foot not even giving him the least trouble. Elaine took off down its length in a crouch, his foot not giving him even the least trouble. The firearm torches followed his movement through the opaque wall. Good. Melissa gave him one more wall to work with, this one a little higher, before ducking around the other direction. She built herself a wall as she moved, suddenly thankful that Aquam was one of the quieter reactions. Across the hall from her, more orange light illuminated her construction as Elaine flared her torch. Guess you learned a trick or two when your wife was an alchemist by profession. More bullets were wasted in Elaine's direction, and Melissa used the opportunity to get closer to their attackers. She built one more wall, a fallback if she got spotted. Only somewhat comforted by the possibility of a fallback, she slung the shotgun over her shoulder and sprinted the rest of the way. She reached the closest goon before he saw her. All the gunfire had likely hampered his hearing, because he didn't notice her until her claws were already embedded in his neck. She tore free, adding a smatter of red to her obscene neon jacket. It smeared as she silently laid his body on the ground. Scooping up his rifle, she checked the magazine. It was high capacity, practically military grade, and highly illegal per Cyphus law. It was also half full, and he had another 2 full magazines tucked into his vest. Melissa snagged them both. This side of the hall was littered with cover. Various locked-up stalls held merchandise for the Cyphus Eagles, District 4's baseball team. Small tables and stools were set out for those who wanted to eat the moment they had food in hand. Several support pillars ran floor to ceiling. It was behind one of these that Melissa took cover, using another Aquam shot to extend that cover. Then, with a steadying breath, she sighted on the rifle she'd taken and opened fire. Leo was the poster child marksman of Precinct 3. People were so used to him being such an amazing shot that they tended to forget about the other officers. There was a time, especially during the academy days, where his incredible talent had fueled Melissa with a powerful competitive drive. She'd never beaten him, but just because a master chef could blow your mind with a simple soup didn't mean he was the only one who could make good meals. Melissa dropped 6 of Bradburn's men before needing to reload. Only now did they catch on that someone was shooting them from behind. With a much better position to work from, Melissa returned fire, dropping 2 more. Having caught on to the subterfuge, the leader of the pack was barking out orders, calling for his men to catch her in a pincer. They obeyed, splitting into 2 groups and spreading out to surround her. She was able to keep one group pinned, but the other had decent cover and were going to become a problem very soon. An explosion sounded, throwing the advancing group off their feet and scattering their cover. A grenade? No. That was the pop of an Aurum burst. Glancing to the side, Melissa caught sight of Elaine as he stood up to lob more crystals. Despite his physical condition, his aim was spot on. It seemed baseball hadn't just been something only his kids had played. The next crystal sent a small group crashing to the ground, clutching at their ears. Several men turned to fire on Elaine, but he ducked behind a wall of ice. Melissa dealt with the men he'd exposed, then dropped the men shooting at him. Between Melissa's shooting and Elaine's use of Naira's crystals, they had the room nearly cleared in under a minute. Only the leader of the pack remained. However, he was flushed out from cover when a firearm crystal landed at his feet, and Melissa dropped him with 3 shots to the chest and 2 to the head. He hit the ground, and the room fell silent. Melissa stood up, keeping the rifle trained on the area with possible threats. "Anyone else?" she called. A firearm torch emerged from the opposite side of the hall as Elaine stood too. "Is that all of them?" "Don't see any from my angle. Any from yours?" "I don't think so," he said. Naira's bag hung from his shoulder, and he clung to it like it was about to sprout legs and run off. "Stay there while I make sure," Melissa said. Elaine stopped, 1 foot already over the Aquam wall, but retreated at her command. Stepping forward, Melissa checked the bodies with quick sweeps of one of the guards' torches. No one was breathing. Wait, scratch that. One person was breathing. The leader of the pack. He writhed on the ground as Melissa approached. The holes in his head were sealing shut on their own. Then his eyes shot open, alight with prismatic glow. Cursing, Melissa opened fire, but the man rolled to his feet and scrambled to cover. Dross. Got a live one, she called. He's healing like you. Stay put. Keeping the gun trained on where the man had gone, Melissa sidestepped for a better angle. To her surprise, the man began to laugh. Come out, she demanded. The laughter continued. So you can shoot me, Snop. I won't shoot if you surrender, she said, just now catching a glimpse of his tail as she continued to circle. Why would I surrender? I'm invincible now. The man burst from the darkness, rushing straight for Melissa. She unloaded the rest of the magazine into him, an entire 12 rounds. These only seemed to fuel the man's howls of laughter and the glow in his eyes as he leapt for her. She grabbed the last magazine to reload, but the man slapped it from her hands with a clawed swipe that drew blood. She barely brought the empty rifle up to block his next swipe, his swelling claws leaving trails in the metal of the weapon's body. He attacked her in a frenzy. Her prism helped her keep up, but only barely. The boost of speed to her thoughts and reflexes came at a cost, one that grew increasingly clear as the fight wore on. Every blow she deflected with her arms brought aching protests from her bones. Every swipe of claws that found her flesh felt like she'd been cut with an open flame. Any hit she took was amplified in its pain by her prism. This man didn't seem to have that problem. She clocked him in the jaw with the butt of the rifle, and he just laughed. She tore through a chunk of his arm and came away with skin and fur in her claws, and his smile only widened. If he felt the pain of any of it, he simply did not care. A few blows later, and he'd knocked the rifle from her grip, too. Flexing her claws, Melissa settled into a defensive stance. Melissa was the better fighter, but how was she supposed to wear down an opponent with precision strikes when not a single pressure point or vulnerable area was responding? Yes, his body was taking damage, and it took the impact of her strikes, but they healed over soon after. Worst of all, he was lucid for far longer than Melissa expected. As his body healed itself, his eyes lost definition like she expected, but he continued to taunt her. A well-planted kick punched into Melissa's hip, and she was knocked back into a pillar. Her breath left her in a dizzying rush, and she struggled to get air to replace it. A pounding ache ran from the front of her thigh all the way up through her back and out her skull. She wouldn't last much longer. Drawing her personal sidearm, she shook her head to clear it and fired on the monster. With her swimming vision, the first few shots missed her mark, clipping the man's jaw, cheek, and ear. She'd been aiming for his forehead. Again, the man just laughed it off. She continued firing, shot after shot, her aim improving slightly each time. With every bullet the man took, his laugh deepened, until eventually it was only a growl. His uniform was dotted with holes, and Melissa saw with relief that some of the wounds continued to bleed. All definition was gone from his eyes now. The taunting stopped. There were no words now, just hunger. With every breath of prism Melissa took in, that hunger grew more evident. He leapt for her, and she barely brought her arm up in time to protect her throat. The anima spawn bit down with a crunch that felt like someone had parked a car on top of her arm. She'd broken bones before, but with prism in her system, the experience was excruciating. Slowly, the pain began to dull. Not because the monster was letting up. If anything, he was doubling down. The more he tightened his grip, the more prism Melissa felt siphoned away. Bringing her sidearm up under his chin, she fired until the gun clicked. Multiple holes punched through the man's cheeks, missing his brain. Despite that, his jaw slackened. She tried to wrest her arm free, but she felt the man's strength slowly returning. Seed Mother, how much more punishment could this guy take? Silver fingers slid into the man's mouth, pulling back and prying the jaws apart. Elaine put his body weight into it, dragging the man backwards, freeing Melissa's arm and giving her a much-needed moment of reprieve. This had to end now, before the man healed enough to kill them. Melissa needed something with a lot more punch. There wasn't room or time to get the Alchemantic shotgun involved. She needed something more immediate. Every part of her mind chastised her as she plucked an aquam shell from her bandolier. This was stupid. There were safety measures for a reason. Instructions were given in order to prevent accidents and mishaps and misery. Melissa always followed instructions and listened to safety warnings. Even so, her hand shot forward, shoving the aquam shell right into the monster's mouth. With wide eyes, Elaine threw the man off balance and ripped his hands free, scrambling backwards. Melissa heard the crunch, then the swallow. In that moment, every ounce of prism she still had called out with a single objective. Hold him. The effect was immediate. Spines of ice erupted from every part of the man's body, some as small as needles, while the most significant rivaled Melissa's arm for thickness. The ice crackled as it expanded, lifting the monster several feet into the air, like someone had tried to stretch a body around a sea urchin. The man was dead almost instantly, the prismatic glow fading as his blood ran down hundreds of icicles and froze before ever reaching the floor. Elaine stared in absolute horror. Melissa didn't blame him. It had been a desperate move, justified even. That didn't make the results any less gruesome. "You okay?" she asked, her body quickly announcing that for her part, she in fact was not. Elaine gulped visibly, shaking his head and pointedly looking away from the dead man. His voice came out tremulous. "Starlight always said it was a bad idea to get reactions anywhere near your mouth. I had no idea. I don't think I'll be able to sleep anytime soon." Yeah, this wasn't going to be the kind of image that ever left your head. "Come on," she said. "We still need to get you out of here." The door burst open for a second time, and Melissa blinked against the barrage of approaching Fyram torchlight. Over 36 people poured in through the doors, looking over the room, the bodies, Melissa, Elaine, and the pincushion monster. Someone else ran up to the doorway before leaning against the doorframe and gasping for breath. Squinting against the lights, Melissa could just make out a familiar large frame. Relief washed through her like the warmth of a shower at the end of a double shift. "It's about time you brought the cavalry, Tolson." Change the name for next time. 904. I did it with the timing. Whew. We are certainly in the end game now. All the fighting, all the excitement. So far, they're alive. And they have backup now. And Tolson's there. Yay. Whew. Yup. Part 7 is action-packed. Which is probably why it's my favorite part of the book. There is it's a very like the ending of a Marvel movie. It's just fight to fight to fight to fight, character to character to character to character. But it's fun because we spent all this time getting to know these characters, and now we get to see them finally going out and kicking all kinds of butt. So getting to see their strengths and specialties actually come out. Yeah, I love this part. Anyway, glad we got it rolling. We got, I think, 5 chapters read tonight. 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58. We read 6 chapters tonight. That's a new record. It's not a difficult record to break with this section because the chapters are a lot shorter in this part because I bounce perspectives a lot, but whew. Well, anyway, as always, thank you all so much for joining me. Hope you had a lot of fun with this section. I'm so excited to keep going. But that will be next time. So I'll see you guys next Tuesday. and hope you have a good night. Bye-bye.